time, a cold winter night, the streets of Washington, D.C. blanketed in snow, muffling every sound. The moonlight cast an eerie glow on the empty streets, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Location: the White House, a symbol of American power and history, standing tall and proud against the dark sky. But beneath its grand facade, hidden in its shadowy corners, lie secrets that no one dares to speak of. Despite being under the strictest security, this majestic building conceals more than anyone could imagine, darker truths that have been buried for decades. The marble floors that glisten under the chandeliers, the polished furniture, everything seems perfect, yet there's an underlying sense of discomfort that no one dares to acknowledge. Character: I, an investigative journalist, had been assigned to write an exclusive feature on the history of the White House. What I thought would be an ordinary assignment quickly turned into something far more sinister. As I passed through the grand entrance, I was immediately struck by the weight of the silence. The grand hallway stretched on endlessly, and the air was thick with something I couldn't place, a presence, perhaps. The kind of feeling that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. My footsteps echoed too loudly, each one reverberating in the stillness, as if the house itself was listening, waiting for something. As I made my way deeper into the White House, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I turned a corner, half expecting to see someone, but the halls were empty, yet full of whispers. Whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, voices too faint to make out, but chilling enough to make me pause and listen. It felt like the building itself was alive, holding its breath, keeping its secrets, and I was the fool who had just walked in, unaware of the danger that awaited me. At first, everything appeared to be as one would expect from the White House: grand, well-kept, pristine. The polished marble floors, the towering ceilings adorned with crystal chandeliers, nothing about it seemed out of place. But as I ventured deeper into the heart of the house, the temperature dropped, and the air seemed to grow heavier. It was as if the walls themselves were exhaling, thick with secrets and dread. The once inviting hallways now felt like a labyrinth that I couldn't escape from. The portraits of the past presidents lined the walls of the corridors. At first, they were just paintings, but as I walked by them, something unnatural began to occur. Their eyes, those painted eyes, no longer just stared blankly into the distance. It was as if they were watching me, tracking my every move. I could feel the weight of their gaze, following me as I passed by, as though they were aware of my presence. My footsteps, once steady and confident, began to falter under the intensity of their scrutiny. I felt a chill run down my spine every time I dared to look at them, and yet, something inside me forced my gaze to linger. But the unsettling feeling didn't end there. As I continued walking, an unsettling noise echoed down the hallway. It was faint at first, just a slight tapping, but as I moved closer to the source, the sound grew louder. I halted in my tracks. The hallways were empty, not a single soul in sight. Yet, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, but not my own, echoed in the silence. I turned to find no one there, and yet the sound of those steps continued to ring in my ears. It was as if I were being followed, hunted, by an invisible force. My heart began to race, but there was no logical explanation for it. No one could be here, not without me seeing them. Still, I could feel the weight of something close behind me, its presence growing stronger with every passing moment. I tried to shake the feeling off, telling myself it was nothing more than the house settling or perhaps my mind playing tricks on me. But as I moved down another corridor, the whispers began. At first, they were so faint I thought it was just the wind, or the hum of the building's old infrastructure. But then, as I walked past a large, ornate mirror at the end of the hallway, I heard it distinctly, a voice, low and rasping, calling my name. Vincent. My name echoed in the silence, but there was no one there. I turned around quickly, my heart thudding in my chest, expecting to see someone standing behind me, maybe a staff member, maybe a guard. But there was nothing. The hallway stretched out before me, empty and cold. The voice, though, lingered in my mind, the whisper still vibrating in my ears. I quickened my pace, but no matter how fast I walked, the whispers followed. They weren't just voices. They were like the soft rustling of something unnatural, something that shouldn't have been there. My eyes darted around as if expecting a figure to suddenly emerge from the shadows. I had been in many old, historic buildings, but nothing like this. There was something different about this place, a heaviness, a sinister presence in the air that clung to every step I took. Then, just as I was about to dismiss it as my imagination, I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. A shiver ran through me, and I froze. There was no draft, no open windows, but the air around me had shifted. The whispers grew louder, the voices now distinct. They weren't just calling my name anymore. They were telling me things I couldn't quite comprehend. You shouldn't be here. The words echoed in my mind, and I felt the distinct sense that I was being watched, not just by the portraits of the past presidents, but by something much older, much more dangerous. Something that had been lying in wait in the heart of the White House, biding its time for someone to come along, someone like me, who would uncover its secrets. I stumbled forward, my pulse racing. Each corner I turned seemed to take me deeper into the maze of corridors, each more oppressive than the last. And then, a door creaked open on its own, as if beckoning me to step inside. I knew I shouldn't go in, but I had already come this far, hadn't I? And as I stepped into the dimly lit room, the whispers grew to a deafening crescendo, filling my mind with an overwhelming sense of dread. Something was in that room, something waiting for me, something that had been waiting for years. As I ventured deeper into the bowels of the White House, I stumbled upon something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. In a forgotten corridor, hidden behind a seemingly innocuous door, I found myself standing before a dusty, ancient room that felt completely out of place. It was a small, dimly lit space, filled with filing cabinets, papers strewn about on a worn wooden desk, and old, leather-bound books stacked high on shelves. The room was unlike any other I had seen in the White House. Its air was thick with dust, and the silence was deafening. It was as though it had been sealed off for decades, left alone to gather the ghosts of its past. I hesitated for a moment, the unsettling feeling of being watched creeping up my spine, but my curiosity pushed me forward. I opened one of the drawers and found a series of files that looked far too old to be of any practical use today. But there was something about them, something that beckoned me to look deeper. The first file I opened sent a chill through my body. It was a collection of transcripts, dating back to the 19th century, containing conversations between past presidents, men long dead, their legacies shaped by history. But the words in these transcripts weren't about politics or policy. They were about events that had never been made public. The conversations described things that should not have been possible. The words were fragmented and difficult to understand at first, but as I read further, a horrifying realization dawned on me. One particular conversation between two former presidents detailed a dark ritual that had been conducted in the very heart of the White House. They spoke of an ancient occult ceremony, one designed to tap into the supernatural in an effort to gain an edge in times of war. The ritual, however, went horribly wrong. The spirits that had been summoned didn't obey the commands of the men who had called them. Instead, they cursed the White House, trapping their souls within its walls. The ritual, I realized with growing dread, had opened a door to another realm, a realm where the dead could never find peace. The very foundation of the White House had been tainted by these forces. The presidents, all of them, had been cursed. They were not merely gone, they had been consumed, their souls bound to the house for eternity, forever imprisoned in a cycle of torment. As I digested the horrific information, a cold shiver ran down my spine. A new file caught my attention, one that was marked in bold, red letters, "Do not read." Despite my better judgment, I couldn't resist. I opened it, my hands trembling, and found a series of notes written by a president who had died mysteriously during his term. The notes chronicled something far more terrifying. The president had discovered that the souls of his predecessors were not only trapped, they were trying to communicate. They were trying to warn the living. The document described a growing sense of unease in the house, a sense of impending doom. The spirits, it seemed, were trying to convey a message. Something unspeakable was about to happen, a catastrophe that would consume the nation. And the key to preventing it lay hidden in the White House itself, buried beneath the layers of history and bloodshed. I slammed the folder shut, my breath ragged as the whispers in my mind grew louder. It was as though the spirits were calling to me, pleading for help, for release. But I knew I couldn't escape the house. I was already part of it. The weight of the curse was beginning to settle on my shoulders, and I could feel the presence of the spirits growing closer. They had been waiting for someone to uncover the truth. Someone like me. The documents, the whispers, they were not just the ramblings of a haunted house. They were a warning. And now, I understood. I had not stumbled upon a story. I had stumbled upon a nightmare, one that had been waiting for the right moment to unfold. The White House was not just a home to the powerful. It was a prison for souls that had been trapped for centuries, cursed to wander the halls, forever reliving their torment. And I was now caught in their web, unable to escape. The final document, the one I had feared reading, was written in a hand I recognized all too well. The president who had been buried beneath mysterious circumstances. The final words sent a shudder through my entire being. It is too late. The door has been opened. The end is near. That night, my curiosity, tinged with a growing sense of dread, drove me deeper into the heart of the White House. I had uncovered too many secrets, and I couldn't stop myself from seeking more. My instincts, however, screamed for me to turn back, to abandon this cursed place. But something held me in its grip, something darker than I had ever imagined. I found the door. The door to the room that no one had dared enter for generations. It had been hidden behind layers of history, behind warnings, behind whispers of forbidden knowledge. Yet here I was, my hand trembling as I reached for the cold, brass handle. The moment I opened the door, a thick, suffocating darkness poured out, enveloping me. It was different from the usual shadows of the house. This darkness felt alive, hungry. The air was stale, filled with an unnatural stillness that made my skin crawl. I could barely make out anything inside the room. The only faint outline I could see was a large wooden desk, old and worn, and in the center, a massive mirror that seemed to swallow the light. I stepped inside, my breath shallow, my body freezing despite the heat that had lingered in the house. As my feet touched the floor, the door behind me slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping me inside. I turned to face the mirror. My reflection greeted me, but it was wrong. In the dim reflection, I saw myself, but my face was contorted in agony. My eyes, once brown, had turned pitch black, and my mouth, once composed, was twisted into an expression of silent suffering. It was me, but it wasn't. The figure in the mirror moved, even when I didn't. My reflection reached out toward me, its hands pressing against the cold surface of the glass, its eyes hollow with despair. I could feel it, that coldness emanating from the mirror, seeping into my very soul. And then, I heard it, the laughter. The sound was low at first, just a distant chuckle. But it grew louder, clearer, more chilling. It came from the portraits on the walls, the faces of the past presidents that I had seen earlier. But their eyes weren't kind anymore. They were cold, soulless. Their smiles had turned into grotesque, twisted mockeries. As their laughter echoed through the room, I felt my heartbeat race, my breath quicken. It was like I was surrounded, no longer just in the room, but in the entire house, consumed by their presence. "Do you think you can escape?" one of the voices whispered. It was a voice I recognized from the documents I had read earlier, a voice from the past, a voice that had been dead for over a century. I turned and stumbled back toward the door, but it wouldn't budge. The walls seemed to close in, the space shrinking as though the house itself was alive, feeding off my fear. The laughter intensified. The figures in the paintings seemed to shift, their eyes following me, their mouths gaping open in eerie, silent screams. I could feel their eyes burning into my back, and it was as though they were not just watching me, they were coming for me. The door finally gave way, creaking open slightly, but as I stepped into the hallway, I realized I hadn't escaped. The house had become a maze. Every hallway looked the same, every room the same oppressive dark. The floor beneath me felt like it was shifting, like the house was warping, closing off escape routes. The paintings, the portraits, the very air itself seemed to close in on me. I ran. I ran through the corridors, each turn leading me into darker corners. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. "We are watching," they taunted, their voices laced with malice. Every step I took, every door I flung open, led me into more horrors, into more madness. The house was playing with me. The walls seemed to stretch, the ceilings grew taller, and I found myself back in the same place, standing in front of that accursed room, unable to escape its grip. The temperature dropped, and I could see my breath forming in the air, a sign that something cold was coming for me. I turned, and there she was, Abigail, the woman from the portrait. But now, her face was twisted, eyes empty, mouth wide in a grotesque scream. She reached for me, her bony fingers scraping across the walls as she dragged herself closer. The house was alive, and it was hunting me. Each time I thought I had broken free, each time I thought I had found a way out, the White House would shift again, trapping me in its endless labyrinth. And in the distance, I could hear the laughter, always there, always following me. The portraits, the mirrors, the whispers, they weren't just warning me. They were part of the house's curse, and now I was part of it, trapped forever in its nightmare. I tried to run. My feet felt heavy, as though the very ground beneath me was sucking me in, pulling me back. Each step was a struggle, each breath came in gasps, but my body moved on instinct, desperate to escape the nightmare that had consumed me. But then, just as I reached the door, I saw it. A figure, tall and imposing, standing in the far corner of the hallway, obscured by shadows. My heart skipped a beat. It was him, Abraham Lincoln. His figure loomed in the darkness, his tall frame casting an eerie silhouette. But his eyes, once wise and kind, were now filled with an unearthly sadness, dark and empty. His face was twisted in sorrow, and the silence between us was suffocating. He stood motionless, but his gaze locked onto mine, and for a moment, I felt a strange pull, an unspoken connection that I couldn't understand. Without a word, he raised a hand and pointed toward the door. His eyes never left mine, but his gesture was clear. He was beckoning me to follow. Torn between fear and some deep, primal curiosity, I hesitated. My feet moved against my will, drawn toward him as if by some unseen force. But the moment I crossed the threshold into the darkened room, I saw them, more shadows, more figures emerging from the dark. The air grew colder. The room seemed to shift, stretching and distorting, as if the walls themselves were alive, contorting to make space for them. I recognized their faces instantly, faces that should have been long gone, faces that had shaped history. The spirits of past presidents, Lincoln, Washington, Roosevelt, each one stood before me, their once grand features now contorted in pain and rage. Their eyes burned with anger, their mouths twisted into silent screams, as if they were trapped in a perpetual loop of torment. I could hear their thoughts, their cries, reverberating in my head, urging me to leave, to stop this madness. But it was too late. They were here, and they weren't just watching anymore. They were coming for me. The air thickened with their anguish, and I felt the weight of their suffering press down on me, suffocating me with the unbearable burden of their wrath. I felt my body begin to sink, as if the very floor beneath me was giving way, pulling me down into the abyss. I struggled, my limbs heavy, my breath shallow. It was as though I was drowning in a dark, bottomless pit. My heart raced, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears as I was dragged deeper into the blackness. The spirits circled me, their eyes burning into me, their voices growing louder, more frantic. Then, in an instant, everything stopped. I awoke with a start, gasping for air, my body drenched in cold sweat. The room around me was silent. The White House was still, as if nothing had ever happened. I looked around, disoriented, trying to gather my bearings. Had it all been a dream? Had I imagined the horrors, the spirits, the curse? But as I turned toward the mirror beside my bed, my blood ran cold. My reflection wasn't mine. The figure staring back at me was a twisted version of myself, with black eyes staring into my soul, and a face warped by despair. Behind me, the ghosts of the presidents loomed in the shadows, their hollow eyes fixed on me. Their expressions were not ones of sorrow anymore, but of something far worse, warning. You cannot escape the White House. Their voices echoed, filling my mind with terror. You know too much now. You will never leave. You are one of us. The words rattled through my mind, sinking deep into my consciousness. I tried to look away, to tear myself from the mirror, but I couldn't. The spirits had marked me. I had discovered their secret, their curse. And now I was part of it forever. As I turned away from the mirror, the house seemed to close in on me once again. The walls shifted. The doors locked themselves shut. I was trapped. The White House was no longer just a building, it was a prison, and I was its newest inmate. I could feel them now, all around me, watching, waiting, knowing. The spirits of the past, those who had once shaped the nation, had never left. They lingered, cursed to roam the halls of this sacred house for all eternity. And now, I too was bound to them, a prisoner in a place where time stood still, and the dead would never let me go. The whispers of the spirits grew louder, their voices a constant echo in my mind. You will never leave. You will never escape the curse of the White House.